This is a story time about how I got scammed buying my car off of Facebook Marketplace.
She drove 4 hours home with her 5-year-old in the back seat, in a car that had no working airbags. She didn't find out until she was already home. This is Susan's story, and before you think this couldn't happen to you, I need you to understand something. Susan is not naive, she's not careless. She did most of what you're supposed to do. She found a listing, she made contact, she drove out to see the car in person. She looked the seller in the eye. And she still got taken. Here's how it started. Susan needed a car. If you've tried to buy a used car in the last few years, you already know what that market looks like. Prices that make no sense, dealers who won't negotiate, private sellers who want top dollar for something with 180,000 miles, and a check engine light they swear just came on. Facebook Marketplace became the go-to for a lot of people trying to avoid all of that. You scroll, you find something that looks right, you reach out. Susan found a listing that looked promising. The price was fair. The car looked clean in the photos. The sellers were a couple and they were based in North Carolina. Now Susan was in Georgia. That's a drive, not a quick one. But when you find a deal that looks real, you don't let geography stop you. She made contact. The communication felt normal. Nothing raised a flag. She arranged a time and she made the trip north and her 5-year-old daughter. What she found when she got there didn't concern her at all. That was the problem. The couple was Colombian. The man in particular was disarmingly friendly. He was asking questions before Susan even had a chance to look at the car. How did you and your boyfriend meet? How long have you been together? He was warm in a way that felt genuine, conversational in a way that made the whole thing feel casual. His girlfriend had actually followed Susan on TikTok at some point. There was this strange sense of familiarity, like they weren't strangers at all. Susan thought that was a good sign. She was wrong. The car itself looked fine, more than fine actually. It had a tag on it, a South Carolina registration sticker which suggested it had been through the system. It had been plated. It had been on the road. There was nothing visually alarming about it. The price was right. The sellers were pleasant. Her daughter was tired from the drive. Susan made a decision. She counted out the cash and handed it over. And then she drove 4 hours home. Nobody pulled them over. No warning lights came on mid-drive. Her daughter fell asleep in the back seat somewhere around the state line. Susan got home, parked the car, and probably exhaled. The deal was done. The trip was over. Life moved on. For a few days at least. Here's where things get darker. Susan started looking into getting the car registered in Georgia. This is routine. You buy a car, you title it in your name, you get your plates. She went through the process and hit a wall. Georgia requires a state safety inspection before a car can be registered. The car had to pass before any of this could move forward. It didn't pass. The inspector went through the vehicle and came back with 8 things that needed to be fixed. 8. Not a minor issue, not a single repair that would take a weekend and $100. 8 separate problems that had to be addressed before the car could legally be on Georgia roads. The estimate to fix all of it came in at just over $1,000. Susan was sitting with a car she couldn't register, couldn't legally drive, and now couldn't afford to fix without spending significantly more than she'd planned. But that wasn't even the worst part. While she was trying to sort out the inspection situation, something else came to light. Something that explained why the car had failed so thoroughly. Something that explained why the registration sticker on the tag never quite matched up. The car had a salvage title. If you don't know what that means, here's the short version. A salvage title is issued when an insurance company determines that a vehicle has been damaged so severely that the cost to repair it exceeds the car's actual value. The car gets totaled. It gets sold at auction, usually for parts or for rebuilding. If someone buys it, repairs it, and wants to put it back on the road, it has to go through a rebuilt title process, which involves inspections and documentation and disclosures. The key word there is disclosures. When you sell a salvage or rebuilt title vehicle, you are legally required to tell the buyer. The buyer has a right to know what they're purchasing. They have a right to know the car was once declared a total loss. They have a right to make an informed decision about whether they want to hand over their money for something with that kind of history. Susan was never told. Not once during the drive to North Carolina, not during the friendly conversation in the driveway, not when the cash was being counted. The couple smiled, asked about her relationship, posed no concern, and said nothing about the title. And here's what that title history actually meant for Susan and her daughter on that 4-hour drive home. When a car is salvaged, it typically means it was in a serious accident, serious enough that the insurance company wrote it off. That kind of damage doesn't just affect the body panels and the frame, it affects the systems, the electrical systems, the sensor networks, the components that are supposed to protect you when something goes wrong, including the airbags. When a car deploys its airbags in a crash, those airbags are done. They're single-use. Replacing them properly is expensive, which is part of why insurance companies total cars in the first place. When a salvage vehicle gets rebuilt cheaply and put back on the market, those airbags often don't get replaced. The sensors don't get recalibrated. The system gets bypassed or ignored entirely. Susan drove home from North Carolina with her 5-year-old in a car that had no functional airbags. If anything had gone wrong on that highway, anything at all, the system that existed specifically to protect them would not have worked. A front-end collision at highway speed, a sudden stop, any of the 100 small catastrophes that happen on interstates every single day. Nothing would have deployed. Susan didn't know this. She couldn't have known this without the information she was never given. Now she's sitting with a car she can't register, a car that needs over $1,000 in repairs before it can pass inspection, a car that was never legally registered in the first place, because a salvage title vehicle cannot be registered without going through a rebuilt title process. The South Carolina tag that looked so reassuring in the driveway, the car had not been registered since it was originally purchased at auction. The sticker existed. The registration behind it didn't. She drove back across state lines in an unregistered car. In Georgia, driving an unregistered vehicle is illegal. If she'd been pulled over, she could have been cited. The car could have been impounded. In a worst-case scenario, depending on how the stop went, she could have faced more serious consequences. None of this was her fault, and all of it landed on her. When Susan confronted the seller, the response was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had already calculated their exit. He said they should have asked about it. He suggested the responsibility was on Susan for not running a Carfax report before handing over the cash. He made it sound like a reasonable oversight on her part, like she had simply forgotten to do her homework. And here's the thing. Susan partially agrees with him. She said it herself. She didn't run a Carfax. That's a step she wishes she had taken. She's not trying to pretend she made no mistakes in this process. But there's a difference between a mistake and a fraud. Not running a Carfax is a mistake. It's an oversight. It's a lesson that costs you. Knowingly selling a salvage title vehicle without disclosing that information to the buyer is not an oversight. It's not a technicality. It's a legal violation. In most states, failing to disclose a salvage title during a private vehicle sale is considered consumer fraud. The seller has an affirmative duty to tell you. It doesn't matter if you ask. It doesn't matter if you didn't specifically demand documentation. The law puts that obligation on the person selling the car. The seller knew. He knew that car had a salvage title. He knew it hadn't been properly registered. He knew about the safety issues. He smiled across the driveway and asked how Susan and her boyfriend met, and he knew all of it. The warmth wasn't genuine. It was a technique. When a seller makes you feel like a friend, you let your guard down. You stop being a skeptical buyer and start being a person having a pleasant afternoon. You count the cash and sign the paperwork and drive home thinking you got lucky. That's what happened to Susan. And she's not the only one. That's the part that sits with her the most. This couple is still out there. They have a system. They find listings, they list cars, they're friendly and welcoming, and they create an atmosphere that makes it hard to ask hard questions. How many other people have driven away in cars like that one? How many other buyers handed over cash and got home to discover what they'd actually purchased? How many of them had children in the back seat? There's no clean answer to that. There's no registry of scams. There's no way to know how many times this exact conversation happened in that driveway with a different buyer standing where Susan stood. What there is a pattern, and patterns like this don't stop on their own. For Susan, the immediate reality is this. She has a car she can't drive legally. She has a repair bill she wasn't expecting. She has the memory of that drive home, 4 hours with her daughter asleep in the back seat, not knowing what she didn't know. She's processing not just the financial loss, but the specific horror of realizing how close she came to something much worse than losing money. Money can be recovered. Time can be spent earning it back. A $1,000 repair bill is painful but survivable. What isn't survivable is thinking about the version of that drive where something went wrong at highway speed, and the car didn't do what it was supposed to do. That's the weight Susan is carrying. She's sharing this because she doesn't want someone else to carry it. The advice she'd give now is straightforward. Run the Carfax before you go, not after. Pull the VIN before you make the trip. Check for salvage or rebuilt title status. If a seller is warm and chatty and seems almost too eager to make you comfortable, that's worth paying attention to. Friendliness costs nothing, and in the wrong hands, it's worth a lot. Ask the questions that feel awkward. Ask them anyway, because the person on the other side of that transaction already knows the answers. And if they're not volunteering them, that tells you everything. Susan got home safe. Her daughter got home safe. That's the only real version of luck in this story. Everything else is damage. She's still trying to figure out what her options are, whether she can pursue the seller legally, whether the title situation can be resolved without costing her even more, whether the car can eventually be made right, or whether she's looking at a total loss on the money she spent. The seller has moved on. He's probably already listed the next one. That's how this works. The person who caused the harm has no ongoing consequences. The person who absorbed the harm is left holding the paperwork. If you're in the market for a used car right now, anywhere on any platform, do what Susan knows now and didn't know then. The price being right isn't enough. The seller being friendly isn't enough. A tag on the windshield isn't enough. Pull the history. Verify the title status. And if anything feels even slightly off, trust that feeling more than you trust the smile across the driveway. Susan trusted the smile. She's still paying for it.